You force your body into a shape, you drill the form 10,000 times. But what if the exact discipline you're using to control your body is the very thing holding your power hostage?
Yeah, that is a big question, isn't it?
It really is. Today, in this custom-tailored deep dive just for you, our resident learner, we are looking at a philosophy that, well, it flips everything we know about mastery entirely upside down.
It completely rewrites the rule book.
Exactly. We're diving into excerpts from this really fascinating historical document called The Living Breath of Soriana, and we're specifically zooming in on a period known as the air nomads of the future era.
Right, and this document is, I mean, it is truly remarkable to read. We're exploring a culture that didn't just, survive a devastating history. They took their most ancient foundational teachings and they followed them into completely uncharted territory.
Uncharted is a good word for it.
Yeah, they fundamentally shifted how they viewed human potential.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the mission for today is to understand how this future era of air nomads elevated emotional honesty and, like the physical body itself, over rigid tradition.
Yes.
They completely reinvented what it means to be a master. But to understand how they did that, we have to kind of throw out our conventional ideas about physical discipline. I mean, when we think of martial arts or high-level athletics, we usually picture the mind completely dominating the body.
Oh, absolutely. So it's almost like a military structure, right?
Right.
The mind is the general, the body is the foot soldier, and discipline is defined purely as obedience. And in earlier eras, even among the air nomads, the body was viewed as a vehicle. It was
Yeah.
something you trained to align with the correct technique.
But this future tradition, they stopped seeing the body as a subordinate student,
Exactly. They made the radical decision that the body was the primary spiritual authority.
which is wild. They realized the body already knew things the mind hadn't even, found the words for yet.
Hmm.
And what's so compelling is that this wasn't some abstract, airy philosophical shift.
No, not at all.
It was born from generations of practitioners across different temples making the exact same physical discoveries. They figured out that emotional states aren't just distractions from bending the elements. They actually are the bending capacity.
Yeah, and if we pull back the curtain on the mechanics here, it stops being mystical and becomes incredibly practical. I mean, they documented how emotional holding physically alters the pathways required for airbending.
Okay, wait, give me an example.
Well, let's look at grief, for instance.
Okay.
The text describes how, when grief is held tightly and unexpressed, it physically restricts the chest cavity.
Wow.
Yeah, and that restriction limits the depth of the breath, which directly chokes off the air channel required for bending.
So it's not just like a kink in the hose. It's more like stepping on a garden hose, but worse because the water pressure is your own life force.
That is a brilliant way to visualize it. You are literally fighting your own current. And they found similar mechanics with shame. Shame inherently causes a person to physically compress their center, to make themselves smaller.
Right, you curl inward.
Exactly. And that pulling in effect works in direct physiological opposition to the expansive, outward-moving energy that airbending demands.
That makes so much sense. What about anger?
So unexpressed anger was categorized as creating stagnant air. It's an energetic knot that basically has nowhere to go. It blocks the flow of any new energy trying to move through the body.
But the flip side of this is where it gets really beautiful, I think. Because they documented how genuine joy, and the text is very specific here, it's not talking about just putting on a happy face.
Right, no toxic positivity here.
Exactly. It means the deep cellular ease of just being glad to be alive. That kind of joy measurably extends a bender's range and precision.
Because when the body experiences that cellular ease, it stops bracing against gravity. It stops bracing against fear.
The pathways just open up.
Exactly. The internal pathways widen. The air is interacting with a fully permeable structure rather than a rigid defensive wall.
To me, the old way of bending sounds like memorizing a speech in a language you don't actually speak.
Yeah.
Sure, it's technically correct and you can hit all the right syllables, but it's fundamentally dead.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Yeah, whereas this future era approach is like actually becoming fluent in the language of your own nervous system.
Fluency over memorization is the perfect framing for this. But, if you accept that premise that the body already knows what the mind hasn't articulated, you run into a massive pedagogical wall.
Oh, sure.
Traditional classroom teaching, where an instructor stands at the front and says, do this sequence of moves, that completely falls apart.
Hmm.
It forced them to reimagine how a student actually learns.
Which introduces this wild new curriculum they called feeling before form. And I'm just picturing my modern attention span trying to handle this.
It would be rough.
Right. Imagine showing up for your first day of mystical martial arts training, expecting to learn some cool moves, and your teacher just points outside and tells you to go stand in a storm.
Just go stand in the wind.
Yeah. I'd be out there for 5 minutes thinking, okay, I felt a breeze. Do I get my black belt now?
And you would be standing there for a very long time because they were out there for weeks, sometimes months.
Months?
Yes. New students did absolutely nothing that looked like conventional training. They stood at the edges of the temples during raging storms with their eyes closed. They sat in the prevailing winds.
Just feeling it.
Just feeling it. And their only instruction was to notice what happened inside their bodies when the atmospheric pressure shifted.
They kept these somatic journals, which I found totally fascinating. They weren't diaries recording external events like, Dear Diary, the wind blew hard today.
Right.
They had to document their interior weather. They tracked what happened to their throat or the tension in their stomach or the temperature of their hands right before a spontaneous bending response occurred.
The underlying logic is that if you cannot clearly feel the air moving through your own physical form, you cannot intelligently bend the air outside of you.
That is so profound.
Form without feeling might produce a competent technique, but it will always lack life.
Wait, I need to pause you there and push back a little on behalf of anyone listening who is used to a structured environment. You're telling me they just stood around in the wind and wrote down how their stomach felt?
Essentially, yes.
How do you ever reach mastery without practicing the actual forms? Like, how do you know you're a master if you don't take a final exam or have a graduation ceremony?
What's fascinating here is how they completely dismantled our definition of mastery. In this era, they had moved away from marking mastery on the body with traditional tattoos, so they had to answer that exact question: what is a master?
And what do they decide?
Their answer was that mastery is a quality of ongoing practice. It is recognized informally by the community through sustained observation. There was no test.
Wow.
There was no finish line.
Because the moment you think you're done, you stop listening.
Precisely. The integration of feeling and form became so deep that the community could literally feel it in the air around the person.
Non-benders could feel it too, right?
Yes, non-benders could feel it. And the text notes that animals felt it most reliably of all because animals don't understand prestige, They only understand presence.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Right. When a community recognized a master, there wasn't a formal ceremony. They would just naturally gather around that person. The text describes these gatherings as being like weather. The atmosphere of the room simply changed.
And a huge part of cultivating that presence came from learning directly from nature.
Mm-hmm.
I love the detail about the cherry blossom. They would have students sit under flowering trees for days.
Just watching them.
Yeah, and it wasn't just a poetic metaphor. The blossom literally taught impermanence without needing to argue about it.
Right.
It blooms, it falls, and it doesn't fight the falling. Meanwhile, the tree itself taught rootedness without rigidity. It survives the storm by swaying rather than standing stiff and snapping.
Nature was the primary text, but they also had human guidance through what they called the emotional curriculum. Students developed feeling literacy.
Feeling literacy, I love that phrase.
It's great. They learned to identify the atmospheric quality of their own emotional states and how those states created physical blockages.
But the masters supervising this weren't acting like modern life coaches trying to optimize a student or a therapist trying to fix a problem.
That is a crucial distinction. The masters acted as atmospheric guides. Their highest demonstration of skill was simply the ability to sit with a student's emotional reality, no matter how messy or difficult, without any impulse to fix it.
Or reframe it, or speed the process up.
Right. They offered an environment entirely free of pressure.
And if you think about it, have you ever had a friend just sit with you when you're an absolute mess? Not offering advice, just letting you be upset.
It's rare, but it's incredibly powerful.
It really is.
Yeah.
That profound ability to sit with someone's difficulty naturally gave rise to the most sophisticated healing culture in the entire world. Like a beautiful paradox, really. A culture rooted in non-attachment created the ultimate healing environment.
It makes perfect sense when we look at their core premise. The body holds what the mind hasn't finished with.
Wow.
While conventional medicine often treats physical illness or chronic pain in isolation, the future air nomads understood that these ailments usually exist in direct relationship with unprocessed emotional material.
Okay.
The healer's job wasn't to violently extract that pain. It was to build an architecture of safety so profound that the body felt secure enough to soften its own bracing.
And their primary medicine was breath. But not just telling someone to, like, take deep breath.
Right, no.
Healers would read the pace, the depth, where the breath was sitting in the chest, and even that tiny microscopic pause between the inhale and the exhale. Imagine going to a doctor today, and instead of asking for your symptoms and prescribing a pill, they just sit across from you and mirror your breathing.
It's completely radically different.
It is. The healer breathes differently, and the patient's body unconsciously synchronizes with them.
Because it leverages the physiological reality that human nervous systems are highly responsive to atmospheric invitation. But, they went beyond just breath synchronization. They utilized something called wind healing.
Okay, wait. I need to challenge this, because wind healing sounds entirely anticlimactic. When you picture mystical healing, you expect, I don't know, glowing lights and dramatic, magical chanting.
Bright flashes of light, yeah.
Exactly. You're telling me someone has deep-seated physical trauma, and the healer just blows barely perceptible warm air currents around their shoulder for an hour. How does that actually do anything medically?
It sounds subtle because we equate force with effectiveness, but the mechanics are incredibly precise. The healer isn't just blowing air, they're applying highly specific microbarometric pressure changes to energetic knots in the body.
Microbarometric pressure changes.
Yes. When trauma is held in a muscle, the tissue is constantly bracing against a perceived threat. By wrapping that specific area in a targeted, perfectly calibrated current of warm air, the nervous system receives a continuous physical signal that the environment is safe.
Oh, so it overrides the body's internal alarm system.
Exactly. It overrides it completely. The text notes that days after a session, a patient might just quietly wake up crying for no logical reason, and the tradition viewed that as a massive success.
Because that stagnant air, that emotional backlog, finally found an exit. It wasn't forced out, it was invited out.
Precisely.
And the temples themselves were architecturally designed to be part of this treatment.
Right.
I mean, think about the relief of stepping into an environment where absolutely no one needs you to perform. You don't have to be strong, you don't have to be okay.
The environment was the treatment, and each temple cultivated a different atmospheric medicine. The Southern Temple, for instance, was famous for its warmth and a constant echoing culture of laughter.
The Northern Temple engaged deeply with the turbulent shifts of weather reading.
Right. And the Eastern Temple was saturated with the resonance of sky music, while the Western Temple, situated at extreme altitude, offered this profound, crystal-clear silence.
Now, if you have a whole society that absolutely refuses to suppress any emotion and they feel completely safe in their environment, what does their culture even look like? What do they do for fun?
They certainly aren't doing rigid, choreographed theater anymore.
Exactly. When you aren't spending 90% of your energy suppressing your trauma, that raw, authentic presence inevitably pours out physically.
And that brings us to their artistic practices, which were inseparable from their somatic philosophy. In this era, art wasn't about performance. Art was essentially a form of listening.
Sky music is the perfect example of this. You play these elaborate wind and string instruments at high altitude in real, unpredictable wind. It's the difference between delivering a rehearsed monologue and having a live conversation.
Right. A monologue doesn't require you to listen.
Exactly. If you just play a memorized piece of music, you're giving a monologue. But sky music forces you to actually listen to the other person in the room, and the other person is the wind.
The musician brings a framework, but they must dynamically negotiate with the air currents in real time. The tradition explicitly taught that any music or dancing that looks or sounds the exact same every single time is an art form that has stopped listening.
Which is why wind dancing was considered the ultimate lie detector test for the body. You cannot fake your way through it. The wind reveals the brutal truth.
It really does.
If a dancer's body is open and flowing, the wind catches them beautifully. If they are braced, defensive, or holding on to fear, the air exposes that rigidity immediately.
It demands total vulnerability, and we see this in their visual arts as well, particularly in cloud sculpting.
I am so fascinated by cloud sculpting. How does a student even do that? It sounds like the ultimate meditation in non-imposition.
Well, mechanically, a bender would use subtle manipulations of temperature and moisture at high altitudes to guide and shape existing cloud formations. But philosophically, the practice was profound. You are dedicating immense focus and skill to create incredible beauty with the full conscious knowledge that the wind is going to dissolve your creation almost immediately.
It trains the mind and body in impermanence. You aren't creating a product to put in a museum or hoard for yourself. You are fully participating in an experience, and you find the beauty precisely because it won't last.
Right.
It reminds me of the laughter meditation they practiced. And to be clear, this wasn't a comedy club. They weren't sitting around telling jokes.
No, not at all. Laughter in this context was understood as the spontaneous, physical result of a body that is receiving existence without resistance.
Receiving existence without resistance.
Yes. When you stop fighting the reality of the present moment, the body's natural response is to laugh. And structurally, that deep diaphragmatic release physically opens the energetic pathways that grief and fear tend to close.
This absolute commitment to authentic feeling completely rewrites the rules of everything. But I have to ask, so what does this all mean for the classic spiritual concept of non-attachment? Because when most of us hear the word non-attachment, we think of becoming stoic.
We picture someone on a mountain, totally detached.
Right. Not caring about the world at all.
That is perhaps the most pervasive misconception of non-attachment, and the future air nomads forcefully rejected it. Non-attachment does not mean feeling less. It means feeling all the way through.
Feeling all the way through.
A spiritually advanced master in this era wasn't someone immune to grief or joy. They were someone who allowed grief, joy, and fear to move completely through their nervous system without interruption.
So it's about flow.
Exactly. If you suppress a feeling, it gets stuck and becomes stagnant air. If you grasp onto a feeling and refuse to let it pass naturally, it also gets stuck. Non-attachment is simply allowing the emotion to arise, experiencing it entirely, and letting it go so that it doesn't become the permanent architecture of your mind.
That fundamentally redefines what it means to be powerful. In our world, power usually means dominance. It means accumulating resources or barking orders or forcing your will onto someone else.
Force and coercion, yeah.
But for them, power was atmospheric presence. The most powerful person in the room was simply the one who created the conditions where everyone else felt safe enough to be themselves. The document uses Sorina herself as the prime example of this.
Yes, the author and foundational figure of this entire philosophy.
Right. During a major historical confrontation, Sorina didn't compel the opposing city to feel something by force. She didn't conquer them. She just disclosed her own feelings so completely and with such radical vulnerability that the entire city naturally responded to her presence. Power as an invitation, not a demand.
And that understanding of power completely shifted their view of global balance. Historically, the world viewed balance as a geopolitical issue, making sure the four nations had equal military and economic footing.
Sure.
But this tradition realized that geopolitical balance is entirely downstream of human internal balance.
That makes so much sense, because if you have an entire nation of people trained from childhood to suppress their feelings, all that unexpressed anger and fear doesn't just vanish into thin air. It accumulates in the body politic.
And eventually, that pressure cooker finds an exit.
Right. A war. A conflict. The elements themselves respond to the energetic conditions humans create.
An unstable, suppressed society will always create an unstable world. And, if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at how this philosophy guided their relationship with the Avatar.
Right.
The Avatar is the ultimate corrective force for global balance, revered by everyone. But the air nomads were incredibly clear-eyed about the devastating psychological toll that role demands.
The tragedy is the Avatar's loneliness. When you really think about it, it's heartbreaking. The Avatar belongs to everyone, which means they fundamentally belong to no one. They carry the memories and weight of countless past lives.
And constant expectations.
Exactly. Every time someone looks at the Avatar, they are looking at a resource. They are looking for someone to fix their most urgent, broken problems.
Which is exactly why the air nomad response to the Avatar was so uniquely profound. They didn't offer the Avatar easy platitudes, and they didn't ask the Avatar to solve their problems. Instead, they offered presence without extraction.
They offered a space to receive without taking.
They simply sat with the Avatar's loneliness. By providing that atmospheric safety, they gave the Avatar a rare environment where they didn't have to perform, didn't have to save the world, and didn't have to be anything other than a human being experiencing that exact moment.
Wow.
For someone carrying the weight of the world, that space is the rarest medicine imaginable.
It really is, and it ties this entire philosophy together so perfectly. This deep dive really shifts how you look at your own life. We learn that mastery isn't about rigid, ironclad control. It's the ongoing willingness to remain open and be changed by what you encounter.
And
We learn that impermanence, the fact that everything ends, isn't the enemy of love. It is the exact condition that makes love necessary. And most importantly, we learn that the body isn't a disobedient animal that needs to be managed. It is a profound intelligence that we need to start listening to.
it's a complete reimagining of human potential. By turning inward and listening to the raw truth of the body, they didn't isolate themselves. They actually became far more capable of healing the world around them.
Which leaves us with a really powerful thought for you to walk away with today. Think about the stagnant air in your own life right now. The stressful information, the quiet grievances, the emotions you've accumulated but haven't fully processed. We spend so much of our daily energy trying to mentally manage or fix that internal pressure. But what would happen if, instead of fighting it, you just created the atmospheric safety for yourself to let that feeling move all the way through? What if you stopped trying to force your body into obedience and just let it breathe?
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep breathing, keep listening, and keep learning.